I've decided that I want to get this bearing mounted in here before I put that last coat of paint on, just so I'm not having to get in a situation where I'm pressing a bearing in or whatever on here and getting this all messed up again. So the problem, as I had already said, was that this bearing is a smaller OD. This is the original bearing. This bearing is actually barely a press fit. I mean, it's actually kind of slips in a little too easy. So I've got to find a way to make this fit in here, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make up some shim. And the question is, I happen to have this. I was just throwing this out the other day. I was wondering if I cut a strip of this with some tin snips. But I figure what I can do is I can compare those dimensions. Alright, so it's pretty clear that this is 1.360. Alright, and so then if I take this one and put it in here, I can see that this is, we'll call it 16 thousandths smaller in diameter. So if I put a band of metal around this, I want the band of metal to be ideally half of 16 thousandths, because you're going to have one wall of the metal here, that's 8 thousandths, and one model here, 8. That'll give you the 16 thousandths that I need to make up. Or maybe even a little bit more, since this one is kind of loose. So let's see what I can find. Okay, so I just cut this with tin snips. That leaves kind of a burr on the edge here, so I had to grind the burr off so I could get a good measurement. And I'm getting over 20 thousandths. So if I put a strip, hold on a second there. Maybe that was on the burr still. Yeah, I'm still getting 20 thousandths. So if I put a strip of this, a band of this around there, that's going to add 40 thousandths to the diameter, which is way too much. So that metal's too thick. This, I just cut this little piece off of a roll of flashing I had bought. And this, I don't know if you guys remember when I was working on the, anybody's seen this video where I was working on putting new packings in one of the hydraulic cylinders on the Oliver. This is the material I was trying to use to help get that back together. But anyways, I just checked it out, and it's just over, I'll say it's like 10 thousandths. So that's great, because the 8 and 8 makes 16, 10 and 10 makes 20. That's 4 thousandths thicker than the exact number I was aiming for, but this was a little loose already, so I think this is going to work. So I'm going to make myself a strip of this. So I cut me a little strip just long enough so that when I wrap it around the bearing, the two ends barely touch. Or actually there's a tiny bit of a gap there at the end, and I cut it as wide as the bearing itself. But now I got these burrs, I got these burrs on the edges I got to get off of there. And I'm just going to use a small ball peen hammer and a hard metal surface. Yeah. I ran over to the shop press and pushed it all the way in, and it's nice snug fit in there. Now I'm just going to try and hit this edge with a file, see if I can't find where that little imperfection is. It seems to keep this from going all the way up into there. Alright, a little bit of work with the file, and I was able to deburr this enough so it goes in, and I think it's still not bottoming out completely, but it's pretty darn close. I think that's going to be good enough. So now just going to clean this real quick and then give it another shot of paint. Well, I was going to put the gearbox back together, but I got to give this some serious thought because I know what kind of trouble I had taking this apart. It should go together easier because now I know how it's put together. I had a lot of trouble taking this apart because of the fact that I didn't realize that that was a tapered pin, or where the pins were that were holding what in, and what order of operation I had to do this in. That being said, I now know that, for instance, I can't just assemble the unit and expect to be able to put it in, because if memory serves me, well, I stand corrected. I could assemble this whole unit, except for, of course, this bevel gear. So I could put this bevel gear in place, the bearings. I'd have to leave the outboard bearing off, obviously. But that, I could slide that in after. And just realize that the assembly that goes on the outside here that holds this outer bearing is missing. So, how much you want to bet it's in the parts washer? Went through all the trouble uncovering the parts washer to look in there, only to find out the parts aren't in there, which was disconcerting. So then I come over here to the workbench and I'm looking and I'm like, where the heck could it be? And then I realize on the back side of my surface plate, they're sitting back there. I never even threw them in the parts washer. I really need to clean this dump up. Alright, so I cleaned up these parts, and I got the box up here to show you that what I noticed is, I noticed some residue of some kind of shellac-like substance all over this. And there's a little bit even here and here. And before I clean that all off, I wanted to show you that, because what I think happened is, I think that they had to seal this to the case. Because if we pretend that I've got the original bearing here, which the original bearing was not a sealed bearing, and the cage was open, and the balls were exposed so that oil would get in there. So if this is running in there like that, I've got the gearbox on its side, but if we turned it up, so the oil would be probably up to about this level would be good. And oil would want to leak out right here between this surface and this surface. So I think we're going to have to, well, I'm going to have to get this paint off of here. I shouldn't have painted that. And I'm going to have to clean this up really well. And then I think we'll use some RTV and seal that to there. On top of that, the bearing goes in here like this. But on top of that, I think this also looks like it has residue of sealant on here. This surface has to be sealed where it mates with this surface. I don't have that bearing pushed in all the way yet. I don't want to put it in right now because I'm going to be doing some work on this. Whew. Alright, so in other words, this surface right here has to mate with this surface well. This is also going to have to all be primed and painted where it's all going to show. Otherwise it's going to look like heck. But here's what's throwing me off. Pretend the bearing's in there and this pushes on the bearing and holds it in position. Holds it, keeps it captive. Right here there's a groove. Good sized one. And that's what's throwing me off. I can't figure out what this groove is for. So if I get a better shot of this. There we go. There's a nice close-up so you can see what I'm looking at here is pretty darn good sized groove right in there, and I can't figure out what the purpose of this groove is. My first thought is, hey, I could get a O-ring, pop an O-ring in there, and the O-ring would act to as a seal for the shaft that goes through there. I can find the shaft. Alright, so here's the shaft, and my thinking is that, get this out of the way, if there was an O-ring in there and basically would sit there, and any oil that tries to migrate along this shaft and come out and leak out over here would be taken care of by the O-ring. My problem with that is that if oil doesn't tend to migrate on this shaft, you know, maybe this is runs pretty dry for all I know. And if that's the case, if I put an O-ring in there, the O-ring's not going to last very long at all. So, you know, I can't put a regular seal in there. You know, a conventional seal, I've got no way to put it in there. So I'd have to put something in there that would fit in that groove. You know, maybe the guys over at Bearing Specialties could suggest a material to put in there to use to do the job I want it to do, but that will hold up in the event that there isn't lubrication present. Okay, so now I'm going to want to prime this piece and this piece in preparation for painting. But this surface here is going to be the mating surface with here that's going to have sealant on it. So I don't want to paint that. This surface here also is going to have some sealant on it. So I don't want to paint that. So really just this edge gets painted on this piece. That's the only thing. And then on this piece, all of this gets painted and this outside edge, but none of this in the back. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep these two pieces together and line up the holes. And that way, oh, that's interesting. Those holes are not equidistantly spaced. There is only one position that those holes line up in. That's interesting. In other words, I can't just turn this and, well, those three lined up. I must have been seeing things. Oh, you know what I was doing? I was lining up with the wrong hole. Duh! Alright, maybe I inhaled some of that dust. Anyways. So I'm going to keep that like that, sandwiched together, and paint it just like that, and then I just gotta put some painter's tape on the back here to protect this area. Well, I modified this just a little bit. Put this little circle piece of tape there to keep overspray from getting into the groove there, because I haven't decided yet if I'm going to, you know, put an O-ring or something in there. A little bit breezy outside today, so doing this on the back of my old wagon here. This way my overspray will only go on the wagon.